Welcome to Firearms Friday, coming to you from the Wyoming State Museum here in Cheyenne. I'm Evan Green. I am the firearms historian for the museum. And for this video, we're going to do a fairly exhaustive and possibly three-part narrative and video on the evolution of Colt firearms. I'm going to talk about a couple to start with that we do not have in the collection, and then we'll move on to the ones that are in the collection. And I'm not going to discuss every firearm made by Colt between 1836 and 2023, so it won't be that long a video. So Samuel Colt, the inventor and a great salesman, patented his first revolver, the Colt Paterson, in 1836. And there had been revolvers before. The old pepper boxes were actually revolvers, but this was a revolving cylinder and a fixed barrel. And again, called the Colt Paterson. And we'll put a picture of Sam Colt in. Interesting guy, and perhaps the most impactful use of Colt Paterson's revolvers occurred in Texas in 1841. There was a ranger company led by a man named John Coffee Jack Hayes. He was a ranger. He had a contingent of about 20 rangers. They were out in the field, and one of those rangers was another guy we'll hear about. His name was Samuel Walker. So up until this point, the Native Americans had mostly encountered armed military people, rangers, or citizens that were armed with single-shot muzzle-loading firearms. And the Comanches, in particular, were a very aggressive, very well-trained. Some referred to them as the best light cavalry in the world at that time. They were consummate horsemen and tough guys to deal with. So Hayes and his group of about 20 rangers encountered what was reported to be 75 Comanches. And after the first encounter, the Comanches charged, not realizing that Hayes and his group were armed with at least 2 per man, if not more, of these 5-shot Colt Paterson revolvers. So the Comanches dispersed. Hayes and his group took after them, discharged another round, which led the Comanches to turn, thinking that, oh, they've shot their wad. Not true. So it led to a pretty spectacular defeat of that particular group of Comanches. So that's the story, again, of one of the uses of the Colt Paterson. Again, that was in 1841 in Texas. And again, nice segue here, because one of the guys in Hayes' command was Samuel Walker. And Walker was really impressed with the performance of the Colt Patersons. But they were 5-shot. Most of them, I think the Texas Patersons were 36 caliber. So not a really powerful handgun. Walker sought out Samuel Colt and asked him to make a much more powerful handgun. Well, Colt had gone bankrupt at this point and had no factory, had no way to manufacture firearms, so he contracted with Eli Whitney, I think the second Eli Whitney, I'm not sure about that, that factory was at Whitneyville, so these firearms are known as the Whitneyville Walkers, and they were huge firearms. Unloaded, they weighed 4.9 pounds. They could take basically the same powder charge, 60 grains of black powder, which was the load for the issued musket at that time. So incredibly powerful firearm. In fact, it was the most powerful handgun in existence in the United States until the .357 Magnum came along in 1935. So there was only 1,100 of these Colt Walkers made. 1,000 were purchased by the military. 100 were made for civilians, and they are one of the most rare examples of Colt handguns extant today. I think a cased, pristine, unused one, cased with accessories, sold recently at auction for almost $1 million. So if you got one in your attic, think about it. So that's the Paterson, the Walker. Now we're moving on to the 1847 Colt Dragoon. This is still a large and heavy handgun. This one weighs 4 pounds 4 ounces, and this is the third model. There were some variations in the shape of the trigger guard and whatnot. But again, a very powerful and useful handgun on the frontier. And often these very heavy firearms, like the Walker and the Dragoon, were not carried on your belt. They were carried on holsters on your saddle. So, okay, here's 47. Now we move along to 1849. This is an 1849 Colt pocket revolver. And I showed this to one of these to a friend, and he said, wow, the pockets must have been big. And I said, well, look what they were comparing it to. So yeah, and actually the 1849 Colt pocket revolver in all its variations was the percussion revolver produced in the largest number. There were variations in terms of barrel length and whether or not they had a loading lever. This one is kind of unique in that it has 6 charge holes in the cylinder. A lot of them were only 5 cylinders, charge holes in the cylinder. So 1847, 1849, here's 1851. And this is probably one of my favorite of the Colt percussion revolvers. It is a 1851 Navy, and it is engraved from the factory. And I'm really fond of this one because of that engraving and the fact that it shows a lot of signs of use. I think it's really interesting that the hammer really has an image of a wolf's head on it. I think that's pretty cool. And the other thing I like is this trigger guard. Look how worn the brass on that trigger guard is here and here. So this was not an idle firearm. This was used and into and out of a holster repeatedly, and still in really good condition. Again, I think the 1851 is one of the best looking of the percussion revolvers. So we're going to take a break here and bring up another couple of revolvers. Okay, we're moving along with the evolution of Colt handguns. This is the 1860 Army, and this was the handgun that was purchased in greatest quantities by the Union during the Civil War. And again, a larger gun firing a 44 caliber ball, actually 454 caliber ball, and very, very effective handgun. This next one is kind of an oddball. This is an 1861 Navy, and you can see the difference between the 1861 and the 1851 in terms of the profile of the loading lever under the barrel. The 1861 Navy, that profile very closely follows the 1860 Army. This is kind of an odd one. I don't know the story, but it has been very, very clumsily converted from percussion to take a fixed cartridge, but the workmanship is just poor, really poor workmanship on this one. So that's the end of the first series, first video in the series on Colt handguns. Thanks for watching. If you have comments or questions, you can put them in the comments. You can also call the museum, which will take a message, and I'll get back to you if you want to talk about guns or Wyoming history.